does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
I did not see a plane go in.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us.
What you're watching here is a video I made back in 2011 after bin Laden was killed by SEAL Team 6. It was a tribute to G.W. Bush and the War on Terror. I once believed, as many others, the official narrative of the attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. And here are the things that have forever changed my mind. May 28th, 2001, the World Trade Center, encapsulated here in a rare glimpse into one of its final days. For in just 3.5 months, this site will be renamed Ground Zero, and the world will forever be changed. But in just a few days, NORAD will run a full-on terrorist simulation. This simulation will be conducted with naval ships, members of the Air Force, and will feature a fictitious attack orchestrated by none other than Osama bin Laden, using drone plane technology and cruise missiles. A haunting near run-through of the attacks that would occur just 3 months later. Which begs the question, how many people do you think know that just 3 months prior to 9/11, they war-gamed an Osama bin Laden terror attack with planes? I would imagine not many. But to properly tell this story of unbelievable coincidences known as 9/11, we need to go back even further.
USA Today reports that in the 2 years before the attacks on September the 11th, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target was the World Trade Center. Here's ABC's Brian Ross.
President Bush has said again and again that no one could have imagined what Osama bin Laden ordered for September 11th.
We knew he hated us, but there was nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government, that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The email was obtained by the nonprofit group Project for Government Oversight. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are questions, big questions, about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian.
Well, that is quite amazing. It's also quite amazing that it took until 2004 for this little piece of information to poke its head out. Because as Peter Jennings himself reported on the day of 9/11, our government were quite clear that, quote, none of them could have foreseen this coming.
The question is, go to war with whom? Because from the FBI, from the CIA, from the Pentagon today, no warning of this whatsoever, no knowledge of who's involved, no clues yet as to who's involved that we have heard about in any respect today.
Now a proven lie, which again poses the question, how many people do you think know that in the 24 months leading up to September 11th, NORAD conducted simulations including jets being flown into the World Trade Center and wanted to hold one with a commercial airliner being flown into the Pentagon? My guess would be next to zero. And while their request to run said simulation of a hijacked plane into the Pentagon just 5 months before September 11th was denied, it's of note that this request was for a second run-through of such an event, not a first. The Pentagon already hosted one that October. October 24th, 2000. A mass casualty event is held at the Pentagon featuring a plane smashing through to its courtyard with full-scale models and everything, which is interesting to me because I feel like this should be the number one story every single September 11th. At very least, it should have been the first thing reported on in the immediate aftermath. It wasn't. Why would you want to hide these simulations from public knowledge? Now, going back to this initial description of Amalgam Virgo, it states that this was a, quote, planning exercise involving the hypothetical scenario of a cruise missile or UAV launched by a terrorist group. UAV stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, otherwise known as a drone plane. These aircraft are remotely piloted with various degrees of autonomy. The most infamous of these being introduced just 6 years prior to September 11th in 1995, the MQ-1 Predator. When you come down and look at its command and sensor systems capabilities, you'll find that by the year 2000, improvements in communication systems made it possible, at least in theory, to fly the drone remotely from great distances. It was no longer necessary to use close-up radio signals during the Predator's takeoff and ascent. Now, to many of us, it is believed that the U.S. went into Afghanistan in October of 2001. If you Google, when did the U.S. go to Afghanistan? It states that the U.S. went there in 2001. Even the Wikipedia page, Manhunt for Osama bin Laden, starts its timeline in November of 2001. But what if I told you it started before that? What if I told you that it started at least a year before that? What if I told you that the CIA was already in Afghanistan hunting bin Laden in the summer of 2000? What if I told you that their team name was the Bin Laden Unit and that they were using full-size Predator drone planes to do it? That's right. The Afghanistan hunt for Osama bin Laden started before the September 11th attacks. The only thing that changed following them was that now it no longer required secrecy. Now the hunt for bin Laden had the full consent of the public, along with new permission to launch a full-scale military invasion.
Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. It does now appear that United States military action against targets in Afghanistan, that action is underway. Let's go to NBC's Jim Miklashevsky at the Pentagon for the latest. Jim?
Tom, U.S. military officials tell NBC News that the airstrikes have begun. According to these...
Former managing editor of the Washington Post, Steve Cole, gives some insight into the real manhunt for Osama bin Laden and the emergence of the Predator drone as a tool of the Air Force/CIA in Chapter 29 of 2005's Coast Wars. We take you back now to a year and a half before the attack on the Twin Towers. By the late spring of 2000, Richard Clarke and his White House counterterrorism group had grown frustrated by the quality of intelligence reporting on Osama bin Laden's whereabouts. The CIA's unilateral human sources and its liaisons with Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and Masood had generated volumes of fragmented hearsay, but nothing solid enough to warrant missile strikes or a snatch operation. Clarke asked his longtime acquaintance in the national security bureaucracy, Charles Allen, who ran all of the CIA's intelligence collections efforts, to work with Admiral Scott Fry, head of operations at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on fresh approaches to the bin Laden problem. Clarke and his aides continued to hope the Pentagon would come up with a plan to use American commandos in Afghanistan. This is spring 2000. So where the public was led to believe the invasion of Afghanistan was a knee-jerk reaction, it was not. They were vying for a way to go to Afghanistan at very least a year earlier. The book continues, despite the confusion of competing recollections, it seems clear, in the general sense, that Clarke, Fry, Berger, Allen, Black, and officers in the CIA's bin Laden unit jointly conspired, amid persistent squabbling among themselves, to launch the Predator experiment. It was these efforts that finally got them the approval to send Predator drones to Afghanistan. In the summer of 2000, the CIA begins engaging in secret talks with Uzbekistan for permission to use it as a jump-off point to fly the reconnaissance drones over Afghanistan. The reason for involving Uzbekistan is because in the early days of drones, they could only be remotely piloted from a distance while already in the air. Takeoff and landing were trickier and required a nearby control station. The drones were first tested in Bosnia in 1995, then Kosovo in 1999. What the CIA found was that they were too light and too slow. Also, there was the problem of the nearby control station. The pilot had to sit in a sealed, unmarked van near the runway of the drone's operating base. For the two aforementioned operations in Bosnia and Kosovo, these bases were in Hungary and Albania. The van was surrounded by generators and satellite dishes, with a pilot inside using a joystick in front of a screen. The drone was controlled by radio signal and then satellites. But next would be Afghanistan, and securing relations in Uzbekistan for the operation in Afghanistan was proving a no-go. If this was going to be pulled off, they were going to have to try a new way. So the CIA gets approval to test a new technology. Full remote drone flights. Takeoff, landing, and all. Piloted straight from the inside of a CIA operations center in Virginia. September of 2000, they run their first flight and pull it off. The CIA has their new toy. 100% remote-controlled, full-size drone planes. Just 1 year before September 11th. Being able to run drone flights straight from home proves to be a game changer. And with their new technology in hand, Air Force drone pilots and CIA officers go on to run 15 Predator drone flights over Afghanistan, manned 100% from the United States. This would, however, only last 1 month, when the program is abruptly ended by Washington. The CIA's operations in Afghanistan put once again in serious jeopardy. It would be just 1 week later, October 11, 2000, that the CIA would present a classified bulletin on Afghanistan highlighting the, quote, growing threat of the Taliban. The very next day, the USS Cole is bombed. What perfect timing. The CIA immediately insists it's bin Laden, who they had been searching for right up until a week earlier. Now think about that for a second. Right as their mission is shut down, a new need for it suddenly pops up. That doesn't seem like interesting timing to anyone? Now, to the public, this attack had one name attached to almost every headline: Osama bin Laden. But what went unreported is that internal documents on the Cole reveal that bin Laden had not been tied personally to the attacks, and that despite the headlines, the FBI and the CIA had not provided a definitive conclusion about responsibility. Yemeni Prime Minister Iriani echoed this to the press when he stated that while investigators suspected he was indirectly involved, they had yet to find hard evidence. In fact, if you go to bin Laden's FBI Most Wanted poster, nowhere does it mention the USS Cole or 9/11. When contacted about this in 2006, FBI Chief of Investigative Publicity Rex Toome stated that the reason for this was because the FBI had no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11, and that bin Laden, as such, has never formally been charged by a grand jury. Which is interesting because the main name attached to 9/11 and the USS Cole is Osama bin Laden. It would be just 2 weeks after the bombing of the USS Cole when the curiously similar simulation drills would begin. October 24th, 2000. The Pentagon holds their aforementioned mock mass casualty exercise in which a plane crashes into its courtyard. Okay? The Pentagon paid someone to make scale model mock-ups of itself with a plane crashed into it just 10 months before September 11th. 7 months after that, NORAD would wargame out the, quote, hypothetical, yet also suspiciously on the nose scenario of Osama bin Laden using drone planes to launch a terror attack, and 3.5 months after that, both of these things would actually happen.
Oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one.
Oh
my goodness, there's another
this
one.
seems to be on purpose.
Oh my goodness, now it's obvious, I think.
So what came first, chicken or the egg? How is it possible that the exact thing happened that they had been running training simulations on since the previous year, involving the exact vehicle they had just developed unique, high-end, one-of-a-kind technology to full remote control the previous year, with the aftermath being the public begging them to do the exact thing they were seeking permission for the previous year: invade Afghanistan.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. I'm speaking to you today from the Treaty Room of the White House, a place where American presidents have worked for peace. We're a peaceful nation. In the months ahead, our patience will be one of our strengths. Patience with the long waits that will result from tighter security. Patience in understanding that it will take time to achieve our goals. patience in all the sacrifices that may come. Today, those sacrifices are being made by members of our armed forces.
To outright dismiss the idea that September 11th may have been planned by individuals in our own government is crazy. But that's just the start of it. Here's where the long list of, quote, incredible coincidences that are 9/11 begin to pile up. For instance, what if I told you that former Secretary of State James Baker and former Deputy Director of the CIA Frank Carlucci spent the morning of September 11th at a conference with none other than Osama bin Laden's brother, Shafiq bin Laden, with George Bush Sr. also being there, among all three, just the day before. The event? An investors conference for the Carlyle Group, an investment firm that just so happened to be at the time one of the U.S. military's largest vendors. Carlyle Group achieved this status by owning Lear Sigler Services, a leading contractor in aircraft logistics support, maintenance, pilot training, and ground support. They also owned United Defense Inc., which manufactured combat vehicles, artillery, naval guns, missile launchers, and precision munitions. Both of these companies went on to receive billions in Pentagon contracts in the aftermath of 9/11. Carlyle Group was more specifically a private equity firm, which in layman's terms means that they buy fledgling companies, restore them over the course of 5 to 10 years, and then sell them for a profit. Basically like flipping houses, but with million-dollar corporations. Carlyle were essentially put on the map when they brokered a deal for Prince Saud bin Talal to buy $590 million of Citicorp in 1991. But what made things really take off for them was in 1993 when none other than George Soros invested $100 million in their Carlyle Partners II fund. With Soros' endorsement, the floodgates opened, and by September of 1996, Carlyle Partners II fund had shot past their initial goal of $500 million to $1.3 billion. They immediately sunk this cash into defense, aerospace, and security companies. This investment would pay off massively in the wake of the September 11th attacks and become their most successful venture ever. This could not have been more of a conflict of interest. For starters, Carlyle chairman Frank Carlucci was Donald Rumsfeld's college roommate. Secretary of State Colin Powell was a Carlyle advisor who considered Carlucci to be a mentor, and even President Bush was a former Carlyle employee. With his father Bush Sr. and the bin Laden family both being actively involved with Carlyle at the time of September 11th. Bush, Baker, and Carlucci had even flown overseas to visit the bin Laden's family headquarters in the years leading up to 9/11. How is this not talked about? How is Bush Sr. and bin Laden's brother being together on the eve of September 11th at a conference for an investment company that made a mass fortune because of September 11th, not a main talking point of September 11th? Or the other interesting coincidence that President Bush's brother, Marvin Bush, was the head of the digital security company for the Twin Towers, Securecom. Or this doozy from the 9/11 Commission transcript, where Condoleezza Rice admits that a strategy to eliminate Al-Qaeda was formed before 9/11, in that spring and summer. Yeah, we noticed. She states that early in 2001, President Bush had told her that he didn't want to respond to Al-Qaeda one attack at a time because he was, quote, tired of swatting flies. But instead, he was developing a new comprehensive strategy to eliminate Al-Qaeda once and for all. In fact, it was the very first national security presidential directive of the Bush administration. After being developed through spring and summer, this, quote, new strategy was finally approved, giving it the go on September 4th, 2001. Just 1 week to the day of 9/11, a new strategy to take out Al-Qaeda is launched. And just 1 week later, all the permission in the world to launch said plans is handed to them on a silver platter.
It is called No Better Time, the brief, remarkable life of Danny Lewin, the genius who transformed the internet. As Don Dale reports, he is believed to be the first casualty of the September 11th attacks.
American Airlines Flight 11 left Boston on a clear Tuesday morning 12 years ago.
Good morning, American 11, with you passing through 190,
What unfolded shortly after takeoff is haunting.
The cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class. And I think there's mace that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked.
The passenger stabbed in business class was 31-year-old Danny Lewin. He was seated between 3 of the suspected hijackers. They knifed him, investigators believe, on the way to the cockpit. Born in Denver, Lewin moved to Israel, where he joined the Army, becoming captain of an elite Special Forces unit. From there, Lewin entered a master's program at MIT, where he met mathematics professor Tom Laden.
It was pretty quickly apparent he was special.
They started designing computer codes to speed up the sluggish pace of the old dial-up internet. Eventually, those codes turned into a company called Akamai and turned them into overnight billionaires.
I hope you guys get a sense there that this is pretty huge. The goal there really is to dominate the world.
Now, while a touching piece on the familiar and heartbreaking story of 9/11's first victim, Danny Lewin, CBS curiously falls short of certain details. For starters, Danny wasn't a captain in just any elite Special Forces unit. He was a captain in the most elite Special Forces unit in the entire IDF, the Sayeret Matkal, the premier Israeli Black Ops group that, amongst other things, dealt in irregular warfare and counterterrorism. And while this graphic is correct in showing Danny's seat, they fail to mention that despite looking like row 4 or 5, this is in fact row 9. Row 9 of Flight 11. And this picture, shown at about 40 seconds into this piece, is from a photo shoot that Danny took just a year earlier in front of what are framed to look like 2 gray towers, wearing a watch named the Hijacker. That's right, the well-publicized first victim of 9/11 was an Israeli Black Ops specialist seated in row 9 of Flight 11 who just so happens to have pictures of himself in front of gray towers wearing a watch named the Hijacker. What are the odds of that? I mean, that's almost too on the nose to be ignored. Now, remarkably enough, Danny Lewin isn't the only captain from the Sayeret Matkal with an interesting connection to 9/11. Let's hear from another.
Well, I was getting this question in the 1990s, and I said that the West really doesn't understand militant Islam. So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
Hi, gentlemen. How you doing? Yeah, there was definitely a blue logo. It was like a circular logo on the front of the plane, definitely towards the front. It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides. And as far as I knew when I saw it coming down, I was like, well, LaGuardia is pretty far away, and that plane is really slow.
Mark, if what you say is true, those could be cargo planes or something like that. You said you didn't see any windows in the side?
I didn't see any windows on the sides. I saw the plane flying low. I was probably like a block away from the subway to Brooklyn, and that plane came down very low. And again, it was not a normal flight that I've ever seen at an airport. It was a plane that had a blue logo on the front, and it did not look like it belonged in this area.
Winter 2000. An Austrian art group named Gelatin begins an ongoing project on the upper levels of the World Trade Center to allegedly add a balcony to the outside. It's called the Bee Thing, and on the morning of March 12, 2000, this helicopter is commissioned to capture the event. And standing on a makeshift balcony extending out of Tower 1 are the members of Gelatin. This video appears to be a recon mission to get pictures of the towers with the balcony serving as a reference point. The event is immortalized in a rare piece of press appearing in the August 18, 2001 edition of the New York Times, and features what at the time may have seemed like a throwaway line, that while occupying the towers, Gelatin confiscated all film and video of the project. Why confiscate every piece of media if you're just really there doing a balcony? Why not simply tell them just not to release it till you're done? They certainly didn't intend to hide it forever. There's an article about it in the New York Times less than 1 year later. And they also published their own 62-page book about it. The book is absolutely damning. The main middle fold-out, for starters, is of Tower 1. The only other thing on the page is a plane. The book also clarifies the exact location of this stunt. The 91st floor of Tower 1. But that is not even the half of it. This picture, seen featured in the New York Times write-up, appears in the book as a 2-page layout, in high def and completely uncropped. with the full version revealing that the entire wall of boxes are labeled BB18. BB18 is a popular fuse housing for when you have a million wires that you need to organize. What would in our team be doing surrounded by empty fuse housing boxes? Gelatin, coincidentally, is also the name of a high-powered blasting gel that cannot explode without a detonator. That paints quite a picture. The back sketch in their own book even refers to this cardboard enclosure as the, quote, Trojan box. But it also shows another thing. This sketch reveals that Gelatin had after-hour night access to the towers, where they note that the Trojan box, quote, opens at 11:45 p.m. and shuts down at 6:39 a.m., meaning that they were working in the towers through the night. And their notes earlier in the book shows that they also had access on the weekends. Which brings us to what I consider to be the three most damning sketches of the bee thing. Now keep in mind, these are supposed art students, okay? Now I know art doesn't always mean drawing, it can mean many things, but nevertheless, these look like the scribbled out blueprints of a heist. Here's one with the tower that says, very depressing building inside, very amazing building outside. Odd. We want to break through to the amazement from the inside, okay, like a bomb breaking out. And then, if you follow the arrow from the first World Trade Center drawing, it brings you to a second World Trade Center drawing that literally looks like it's collapsing. And on this one, instead of saying depressing inside, it says deep pression inside. Pression means pressure. Deep pressure inside. Next to a sketch of the World Trade Center starting to crumble. Definitely not shady. Here's a sketch of someone jumping out of the Twin Towers, an unfortunately all too familiar sight on that dreadful morning. And finally, this sketch that has God crossed out in the clouds, but rewritten under a picture of an airplane. And right next to that, a line just before the towers that reads, last chance to open a parachute. The only reason you would need a parachute would be if your plane was about to crash into that tower. All right, so this is a sketchbook that shows a crumbling tower, another sketch of the towers with a hole right where the plane hits and the same size, unless that's the biggest balcony in the history of mankind, right under a picture of a plane with the word God written under it and last chance to open a parachute. They had weekend and night access. The only pictures of them are standing next to 100 fuse boxes. Their name is Gelatin, which is a high-powered explosive, and it's called the Bee Thing, working on the same area of the building where the first explosion hits. But according to Gelatin, this was just a fun project to build a balcony. Well, if they have nothing to hide, then why in 2005 did they change their name from Gelatin, spelt like the explosive, to Gelatin, spelt with an I? Again, why did they confiscate all video and film of the project? And why is the website on their book, The Bee Thing, that featured these three most damning drawings, now removed? Even on their website, these drawings are nowhere to be found. The closest you can get is this link right here, and it only shows you a couple. If you have nothing to hide, why would you hide these? Are all official ties between Gelatin and these pictures deleted forever? The answer? No. In fact, Gelatin still stores these pictures on this very website. And while there is no menu, submenu, or link anywhere on the page to access them, if you come up to the URL box and manually replace projects with WTC, it takes you to a hidden gallery. That includes, you guessed it, these very sketches. Image 3, man jumping out of the towers.
Oh, fuck, man. Someone just fell.
Image 6, last chance for a parachute. And image 10, the building collapsing. All three erased everywhere else, but kept hidden here like trophies. Which brings us back to this footage. Because not one, but two art teams curiously took aerial helicopter footage of the 91st floor of Tower 1 in the year and a half leading up to the attack. Both eerily similar, with people standing in the windows of the 91st floor. First Gelatin's in March 2000 was taken on the east facade, and then the E-teams a year later taken on the north facade, directly in line with the first hit. Even eerier, just weeks before that, E-team would light up 5 floors with their name. Look familiar? They lit up floors 90 to 94, and the first plane explosion hits floors 93 to 99. What are the odds? The middle of their footage even contains an animation of the near exact flight path of Flight 11. the B thing, and the E team. A chilling memorial of the World Trade Center's final days. Gelatin's work on the B thing would be presented at Leo Koning's gallery. Opening day? You guessed it, September 11th, 2001. Now, many of you might wonder why the topic of 9/11 is one that's so near and dear to me. I think in many ways, on the surface, my story parallels a lot of others. It was traumatizing. It felt like my backyard. The vision of watching the towers across the water engulfed in smoke will forever be etched in my brain. But my real connection came later. Because 5 months following 9/11, February of 2002, I began my journey as a surveyor/skyscraper layout engineer in New York City on Trump Building F. I did this and also detailing later on for 17 years. And basically what that entails is this. When a company sets out to start a building, I'm the guy who's given the architectural set of blueprints and the structural set of blueprints, along with any other details, insert plans, mechanical drawings, and so on. I'm the guy who gets the information. It's my job to then calculate and really convert the numbers in each set into the localized grid coordinate system I've created for the job. Then I essentially have to translate them into English for the rest of the job via field working plans. Establish a new line and grade on every floor, and finally use my field drawings and the new line and grade to physically lay out every single aspect of every single floor. So it's safe to say, if there was ever one topic I was qualified to give an opinion on, it would be the collapse of a building. Now, of course, this is just my personal assessment based on the things I know about skyscrapers, coupled with years and years of studying these videos over and over again. The first things first, those buildings were tanks. I mean, those might have been the two sturdiest buildings on the entire planet. The majority of buildings get most of their strength from the core, around the elevator shaft. It's where the heaviest steel will be. It'll come up the middle of the building. It creates essentially a spine. So this is where most of the strength in the buildings come from. However, if you look at the Twin Towers, they were built like that, like every other building, but they were also built with an exoskeleton of some of the heaviest steel in any building citywide. To make a hole that size in those buildings, you'd have to drive an aircraft carrier into them. A plane like that would just shred itself like paper. Half of it wouldn't even enter the building, would just crumble and fall to the ground. I don't care how much jet fuel's on board. Take a look at this video of this plane being scrapped here. The demo claws are going through it like paper. They're nothing. They're lightweight aluminum cylinders. There is no way on planet Earth that that thing could blow a hole that big into one of the most solid buildings ever created. This 25-foot high aluminum can that can't even withstand hitting a seagull blows an 80-foot crater in this building? I don't think so. There almost had to be explosives either on board or pre-planted at the impact zone. Which brings us to the collapse itself. Then you have the top 10 plus floors about to fall onto the bottom 90, leading us to everyone's favorite theory. They say it pancaked. Oh, the building just pancaked. Well, first of all, it's not even what pancaking looks like. When floors pancake, the horrible occurrence that is, they stop in between each drop. It goes floor, 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 floor. Now look at this video right here. You can see briefly there's a lot of smoke. It drops the floor and then stops for a second. Then it drops again. Well, look at this one collapsing. It collapses the floor and then falls over. These are the two most common occurrences with a pancake. It either goes floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop. Or what most likely would have happened is it would have come down those first couple floors and then the whole top would have fell off onto the streets. Furthermore, buildings hit with projectile, and in the case of this example, missiles, almost always tip over. These buildings neither pancaked or tipped over. They free fell perfectly into their own footprint. It is nearly impossible to get a clean, straight down collapse without a building being meticulously pre-wired for demo. The odds of it happening 3 out of 3 times to 3 buildings, all with significantly different damage done to them, is a statistical impossibility. There's only one thing on Earth that can make 3 buildings with 3 different damage locations free fall perfectly into their own footprint, and that is controlled demolition, period. It's not even up for debate. Now let's take a look at the Nodia Twin Tower demolition video from August of 2022. Demolished to dust in just 7 and 9 seconds. Look familiar?
explosion.
In this, they use the implosion technique, an advanced technique used most commonly for demolishing high-rise buildings. This method is adopted when there are many surrounding buildings. In this way, the demolition of the building is done right onto its footprint. Its advantages are listed as being, quote, more suitable for tall buildings and being fairly fast. Exactly how the towers came down. Free fall speed. And what type of explosive is commonly used in the implosion method? You guessed it, gelatin.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
They heard a loud explosion immediately preceding the building's collapse. And this wasn't the only report of major explosions preceding the building's collapses. In fact, if you go back to the in real-time coverage, it was a near certainty.
And you can see the two towers, a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
And then when we came outside, it just blew, the tower blew.
All of a sudden, you hear explosion, and you could see the building starting to collapse.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
Again, there was a third explosion. It is unclear what caused it, whether it was a bomb or whether the first plane that crashed into the tower had somehow been booby-trapped with a bomb that was timed to explode later after the crash had occurred.
It was an explosion. It was way up where the fire was, and the whole building at that point bellied out in flames, and everybody ran.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion. Both have been hit by planes. We understand it was a third explosion, however, that brought the tower to collapse.
As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
When the first tower collapsed, it was a massive explosion. I looked up, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down.
The offices are located.
Wow.
And some people were...
Jamie, I need you to stop for a second. There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising. And I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire, and now it looks almost like a mushroom cloud explosion.
You can just hear this huge kaboom.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Hello? Yeah, David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, the scene is horrific. One of the two towers literally collapsed. I was making my way to the foot of the World Trade Center. Suddenly, while talking to an officer who was questioning me about my press credentials, we heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us. Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
Are you able to talk? Can we just talk to you about what happened?
I was there when it exploded.
You were right there at the building?
Yes, how people trapped.
When I tried to tell people in a moment, we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion, and everything got dark.
Pandemonium here a short time ago. When the building did collapse, or whatever it was that happened, it was a huge explosion, a huge rumbling cloud of smoke and fire came across Church Street.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of, antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
We're not sure exactly what happened, but it was another explosion on the far side of one of the buildings from where we're standing, the reverberation, and another explosion on the right-hand side.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
It sounded like the 4th of July. You heard a big explosion before the building fell? I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like.
1013 down 2 has had a major explosion and what appears to be a complete collapse surrounding the entire area.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion. Then the building, the rolling sound sounded like the building collapsed.
And in addition to all these, there were also reports of many preliminary explosions going off from while the buildings were still standing.
Then somebody said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
There was an internal explosion in the building, maybe like 10, 15 minutes later.
The first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were 2 explosions.
Okay.
I was over. I heard 2 explosions. Did a plane hit that? I heard 2 explosions. 2 separate ones.
I heard 2 explosions, however. There was a first explosion that was louder, and then a second explosion.
And firefighters brought a lady to us that was covered in smoke, and we heard an explosion, turned around, commandeered an ambulance, and we left the scene very quickly.
Then it was some secondary explosions.
Just about ready to go outside when we heard a secondary explosion.
Doctors treating the injured here say most of the 100 patients treated so far are suffering not just smoke inhalation and eye damage, but fractures. Many of them have told the doctors that they were responding to the attack on the South Tower when they were suddenly trapped by the second explosion in the North Tower. And many of the fractures they're suffering come not from fall and debris, but from the concussive force of the explosion, which slammed them against walls, knocked them to the ground, or slammed them up against their own ambulance.
It was actually on the 78th floor of the second tower, and was evacuating the tower and experienced all these explosions.
But then when we got down to about 3, we heard like another explosion. I don't know what that was.
It just went ba-boom. It was like a bomb went off, and it was like holy hell coming down them stairs. And then when we finally got to the bottom, they were coming out on a mezzanine level there, and another explosion came right on, just everyone flying.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's the One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, it was this big explosion.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
We made it all the way downstairs, and then when we were just about to come out of the building, there was another blast, and all the lights went out, and this is what happened then.
The glass came down?
We didn't see we were still inside the building. All we heard was a big blast, and the whole volume of air moved. And we came out through the subway.
But then there were other doors that were locked, so we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
People were experiencing secondary blasts in the stairwells the entire way down. And this is, of course, exactly where these blasts would be occurring in a controlled demolition, in the core of the building. And as you can see here, the stairwells were also in the core. On top of all that, there was also further evidence from that day of an explosion on the B1 basement and lobby of Tower 1. That occurred, according to workers inside the building, simultaneously with the first plane, with some saying that the basement actually detonated first.
I went straight to the North Tower, to the basement number 1 of the North Tower. The building has 6 sub-levels of basement, B1, B2, all the way down to B6. And at 8:46, while we are in the basement, all of a sudden we hear boom, an explosion, very loud, very powerful, that lifted us up. The walls cracked, the false ceiling fell on top of us, the sprinkler system got activated, water started spewing everywhere, the fax machine fell on the floor, screaming, everybody's screaming. I thought one of the generators blew out from the mechanical room because it lifted us up. And when I went to verbalize it 6 to 7 seconds after, we hear all the way on the top of the building, 2 different events.
The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then we heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong. The amount of explosions I've heard from 8:46 to the time we get out was so many, at least 10. It was just like multiple explosions, to where I felt like there was different grenades. That's what it sounded like. It was just different grenades being set off like in the building. It was like, there was one major explosion, and then there was different explosions throughout that period of time until we got out.
I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
I took the train, got out underneath. The smoke was in the train station. I worked down on B1 in the World Trade Center. What happened? And the whole place is filled up with smoke. I popped our ears, couldn't hear anything down there.
The ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby, where they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
As we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
Pfeiffer was the first chief into the building. Right away, a guy from the Port Authority told him the damage was somewhere above the 78th floor. But all you had to do was look around. It was obvious. Something had happened right there in the lobby.
You just saw that all the windows were blown out. The lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building. But then another plane hit the other building. But when I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, something, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down, and I got smoke and everything on me. I just feel a little shook up because I got blasted.
That's several accounts that the lobby blew up before the first plane, and that the subway was filled with smoke. How is this never mentioned? And what about the FDNY? According to the firefighters who were in the towers, there were bombs going off all over these buildings.
I demand to know, as should everyone,
especially the media, why important testimony made that day from over 150 police, firefighters, and first responders regarding explosions wasn't included in the commission report, nor investigated further.
What happened?
We was in the explosion. We was in the lobby, and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the...
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. 'Cause we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second it was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one.
There was explosions. I mean, there was a couple explosions.
Yeah, while we were in the building. We were wanted for stairwells.
A couple of times we dove into the stairway. We thought another plane was coming. We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was like if they had detonated.
Yeah,
detonated. They were planning to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got that close to the building. An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
5 minutes and the elevators exploded on us. Yeah, we said something's wrong. Yeah, I mean, a plane hit up on the 80th floor. I mean, in 5 minutes, all of a sudden now the elevator's exploding on the first level of the lobby.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
It's undeniable. Explosives were planted in these buildings. Even the FBI was initially admitting this.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on.
Of course it was their working theory. Literally every person in the building said there were detonations going off.
It sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
Tower number 1, the second tower collapsed. It was the exact same series of detonations.
All of a sudden I looked up, and about 20 stories below, at least that's what it looked like to me, about 75 flights up below the fire, I saw from the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits just went down, and then I just saw the whole building just went, and as the bombs were going, people just started running, and I sat there and watched a few of them explode. I looked and I could see the corner, and it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
You can observe detonations going off before the collapses, like this window blowing out, or this pre-explosion below the impact zone. You can observe them leading the collapse by about 10 floors or so, making the zero resistance of their free fall make sense. The notion of controlled demolition only became a taboo after the fact, as you can see, a sort of revisionist history in regards to 9/11. But on the day of, everybody knew it.
That was a bomb that did that. Oh, God, look at that. That was a fucking bomb that did that. There's no goddamn way that could have happened.
Okay, the second tower has gone down.
I'm not going any closer. We had it wired for explosives, obviously.
The tower would not have collapsed absent some tremendous trauma.
It could have been something that was planted.
Or a bomb planted in the building, yeah.
This defies belief.
We have a World Trade Center engineer who has a comment.
They're very strong buildings, as you remember from the blast last time. So,
But what does it take as an engineer to do the Oh, no.
As this man is standing here saying they're very strong buildings and that he expected them to continue to stand, we in the background see the buildings collapse, which again feeds that feeling that there was something else, that there may have been something else that brought those buildings down.
There was a lot of talk there in New York of another explosion prior to the collapse of the first building.
I said, there's no way. That's a steel structure. That's just draperies and carpets and so on. And I didn't really finish that sentence. And right up at the top, like we were invited to watch, boom, 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 down it started to come.
I am reasonably sure that it was not the impact of a plane, the one that did this.
It didn't fall over. It looked as if somebody put TNT all throughout that building.
As if a demolition team set off when you see the old demolitions of these old buildings.
The way the towers collapsed seems similar to pictures we've become accustomed to watching, as old buildings like the Kingdome in Seattle are taken down with explosives.
This was clearly, the way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. This is not, it's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way.
I think it's safe to say there were bombs in these buildings. And this doesn't just go for Towers 1 and 2. It also goes for the often forgotten World Trade Center 7.
Well, me and Mr. Hesh, the corporation counsel, were on the 23rd floor. I told him we got to get out of here. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hesh. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here.
The Red Cross rep was like, he goes over and he says, well, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building. They just said bringing a building down. He came back over with his hand over the radio and what sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off and you heard 3, 2, 1. And he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. There's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something.
You want to call your mother or something?
Somebody grabbed my shoulder and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you're hearing boom, 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 boom. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it. You know? So yeah, I want to know what took that building down. I don't think it was a fire, and it certainly wasn't a plane.
Which brings us to World Trade Center 7. For you see, as I've alluded to throughout this video, there weren't 2 skyscrapers that came down in New York City on September 11th. There were 3. Tower 1, Tower 2, and 370 feet to the north, World Trade Center 7, or as it was locally known, the Salomon Brothers Building. Standing 47 stories high, World Trade Center 7 would be the tallest building in more than 30 states still to this day. Yet it is rarely even mentioned. World Trade Center 7 wasn't hit by a plane. It didn't have a huge hole blown into it. So how could it fall? In general speaking, the official explanation given in the government NIST report for the collapse of World Trade Center 7 is fire. That's right. Simply fire. Triggered a New York City skyscraper less than 15 years old, built with some of the highest building regulations in the world, to go into full failure collapse mode. Definitely not suspicious. But if you want to go into a little more detail, the NIST report goes like this. A fire on the 12th floor heated up beams G3005, A3004, B3004, C3004, and K3004, causing them to thermal expand to the west, pushing girder A2001 6 1/4 inches west, knocking it off its column seat at column 79, initiating an internal failure of 9 floors, which in turn caused the entire building to collapse. That is the official report of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. Leroy Halsey's, Zilly Kwan, and Feng Xiao's structural reevaluation of the collapse detail the many inaccuracies in the official NIST breakdown. For starters, NIST only shows thermal expansion in one direction, allowing for 0 give on the outside of the building. This is not the case, as, of course, both sides of said beams would incur their thermal expansion. Furthermore, even when assuming the false notion of beam shifting in only one direction, they found that they still would have needed to increase the coefficient of thermal expansion of the steel by approximately 40% in order just to get them to move A2001 the 6 1/4 inches required for it to fall off its seat in the first place. Now, speaking of its seat, NIST also removed column 79's side plates, pictured here in the structurals, and confirmed to have been indeed added here in this 1986 footage of World Trade Center 7's construction, meaning that even if girder A2001 could be pushed with such a force, it couldn't move more than 3 5/8 inches anyway, for it would get wedged up against column 79's western side plate, making it impossible for it to slide off the way NIST claims. To add to even that, NIST simulations conveniently leave off girder A2001's web stiffeners, significantly decreasing the bending resistance of the flange. During their investigation, Halsey, Kwan, and Chow found that even if they removed the western column plate, set the beam to move solely west with zero give to the east, and added the 40% increase, that the web stiffeners alone were still enough to prevent the girders from walking off its seat. On top of all that, when calculating the thermal expansion of G3005, NIST conveniently leaves off connector beams S3007, G3007, and K3007, despite showing them in other areas of the report, which prevents the movement they are claiming to have happened as part of Girder A2001's displacement. So in layman's terms, the driving force behind NIST theory is an impossibility. Architects and engineers then reconstructed World Trade Center 7 piece by piece digitally, using the structural blueprints, and then ran through simulation after simulation until they found one that resembled the actual collapse that we were able to observe of World Trade Center 7. They also inputted and simulated the alleged official NIST report's theory, in which the simulation tipped the building. This makes sense, as column 79 and girder A2001 were way over in the northeast corner of the building. If their failure had truly been the linchpin to Building 7's collapse, then it would make logical sense that at some point the building would tip east rather than flow straight down. Architects and engineers ran simulation after simulation until they finally got the one which resembled the actual collapse. And the only way they were able to get the simulation to accurately recreate what happened on that day was with the simultaneous failure of all core columns over 8 stories, followed 1.3 seconds later by the simultaneous failure of all exterior columns over 8 stories. Very much like a controlled demolition.
It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Also, you have owner Larry Silverstein in this interview actually saying that they gave the order to pull it.
I said, we've had such a terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Then you have the British Broadcasting World News Update reporting it as having collapsed already, when in fact it is right behind her. That's the Salomon Brothers building right there, better known as World Trade Center 7.
You might have heard a few moments ago was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Yeah, they're sketchy, all right, especially considering that it's still standing in the live shot behind you. Jane's feed would stay on the air with the Salomon Brothers building in the background for another 6 minutes, until this happened.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
Clearly, someone had advanced knowledge that this building was about to be brought down and jumped the gun. But going back to the structural reevaluation of World Trade Center 7, you'll find that when calculating the impact force of NIST's alleged falling girder A2001, even though, as we just went over, couldn't have happened anyway, the impact force it would crash into the 12th floor with works out to be 61,950 pounds, less than a tenth of the 632,000 pounds of force that would be required to shear the girder bearing seat below it, meaning that even if the impossible occurred and there were no connector beams, thermal expansion only happened in one direction, there were no web stiffeners, and the column 79 side plates magically disappeared, allowing girder A2001 to collapse onto the floor below, that still wouldn't even generate 10% of the force required to further collapse the floor below it, and it would have been contained right there on the 12th floor anyway. Yet, with all that in mind, on this day, despite not being hit by a plane, despite having no gaping hole, despite its beams being fireproofed, and the whole slew of other flaws in the NIST report, World Trade Center 7 also fell at free fall speed perfectly into its footprint, making it only the third steel building to ever collapse from fire alongside World Trade Center 1 and 2. The only 3 times in history, all in one day, all falling the exact same way, despite all 3 of them being damaged in 3 different ways. It's also of note that since, only one other steel building has ever collapsed from fire, and that was in Iran, which, if you'll observe, falls much more realistically, asymmetrically. Here's a side-by-side comparison. Which one does World Trade Center 7 resemble? I mean, how are we even still discussing this 2 decades later?